Welcome to the Communication Diva Podcast, episode 36. In this podcast, the Communication Diva focuses on emotional triggers, anything which creates an intense emotional response. Emotional triggers can be anything picked up by your senses, including words or phrases. Think election season.
Hi, and welcome to Communication Diva, the podcast that helps you to improve your communication skills in order to improve your relationships. I'm Jen Swanson, and I'm glad you've tuned in today. And I'm wondering, how have you spent your summer? Our summer is just about over, sadly, and it is September 3rd when I'm doing this podcast episode. And I'd like you to drop me a note to let me know what kind of summer you had. How did you spend it? What did you do? If it is indeed summertime where you are. I know I was just in correspondence with a friend of mine, Merv Dykes, who did a podcast episode with me a few weeks back. And he is in New Zealand, and so he is not in the middle of summer at the moment. So if you are listening and it is summer where you are, send me a note. You can contact me via the website at www.communicationdiva.com or by email at jenn@communicationdiva.com and let me know what the best part of your summer was. And if it's not summer again where you are, let me know what you've been up to the past few months. I love correspondence. Ours has been really busy, and in many ways, it really didn't feel like summer this year. As many of you know, we moved house. We were traveling quite a bit. I went to New York twice for podcasting, the New Media Expo, and the second thing was to speak at the 140 EDU conference. And then I had a few days in Chicago having a belated honeymoon with my honey. And then I've been working all summer as well until just the last 2 weeks. So no rest happening here. We're still unpacking and having construction people through our house and all the rest of it. And so it's been a bit of a whirlwind. Today is what we call Labor Day, and this weekend is a long weekend here in Canada. It's a long weekend with many people taking an extra day to rest or to scramble for back-to-school supplies. The stores are crazy busy. And as of tomorrow, all of the children are back in school and most of the people are back to work and the usual routines are established again. And I kind of like that in a way as well because there's some structure to the day. So that's good. With the going back to being with groups of people, I decided, new classrooms of students, new groups of employees and the like, I decided today that I would talk about emotional triggers, what they are and how to recognize them and how to work with them, particularly when you are working with teams of people or in situations, social situations or workplace related situations. So let's start with what is an emotional trigger. Well, really, it's anything that sets you off, usually in a larger than needed reaction. So anything that triggers an emotional response in you, and the response can be rational or not. It doesn't have to make sense. It just is. So it could be a word, it could be a look, a sound, a sight, a smell, a taste, a person that you see, any of the senses of sight, sound, smell, taste, touch. It could also be an internal thought pattern that stems from a memory or one of the familiar loops that we play inside ourselves, those things that we say over and over, or we hear our internal self-talk. Emotional triggers can be connected with some past trauma or some unrelated event to the current situation. And again, sometimes they don't seem rational or they don't seem to make sense, or the emotional reaction is much, much larger than, dropping a piece of paper on the floor and suddenly you burst into tears. There's something else going on there. Emotional triggers can cause reactions that are out of conscious awareness, and when unconscious, can lead to really negative consequences, damaged work or personal relationships, all sorts of troubles. So they're powerful. Emotional triggers can trigger powerful reactions and responses that sometimes are hard to understand. Now, not all emotional triggers lead to negativity. Things like the taste of apple pie could set off all sorts of sweet memories of home. The smell of a spicy food might bring up reminders of travel or of dinner with relatives. Emotional triggers can be positive, but often those are not the ones that get us into trouble. And what I wanted to talk about today are the emotional triggers that might put us into what can be called an unresourceful or a non-useful state of mind. And these are the ones that you may want to pay attention to. So the ones that will set you off and put you into a tizzy, the ones that make you feel yucky in your body. And once something is recognized, it is exposed, and then it's much easier to work with. Sometimes it's just being able to notice that will ease it off. So if you're able to notice those times when you are triggered or set off or put into one of these unresourceful states or fits, whatever you want to call them, then you can begin to change what happens next. Now, in order to make any changes, however, you need to first have the desire to change and a willingness to be honest about yourself and with yourself. So if you're going into an unresourceful state that might be a state of fear or a state of fury or rage or something that's not useful to you, not resourceful, then it's helpful to be not as judgmental as you might be about that. Just be noticing. Just be aware of the fact that you're having that. Don't judge yourself or beat yourself up about it, but just notice what is. And sometimes just noticing will, and being honest about it, will be helpful in alleviating that emotional response. So with these ingredients, the desire to change and a willingness to be honest about and with yourself, you might not be able to stop the triggering events from happening, of course, but you might be able to stop being emotionally triggered, which I think you might agree would be a useful thing to be able to do. So how first do we recognize a trigger? Okay, so this is going to take some work, and it's going to take being gentle with yourself because you might not notice every time it happens at first. It's kind of like when you buy a red car, and next thing you know, you're noticing all of the red cars on the road that you never noticed before. It's a matter of awareness, and sometimes it takes a little bit of practice to notice when you are being triggered into some kind of emotional state that you don't want to have. It's going to take you getting curious too, getting curious about yourself and why you are reacting to the trigger. And one of the suggestions is that you might even want to keep a list if you are a list sort of person, which I happen to be, on paper or using a mobile device or in a little book or whatever. Keep track of what happens when you encounter one of these triggers. So I'm going to use an example, and this is just a random example. And my husband was reading these show notes, and he said, "Are you talking about me?" Which I wasn't, actually. This is an example I use in my classroom. But let's just use this random example that is not about anybody I live with as an example. Okay, so a person you live with leaves his or her socks balled up on the floor next to the laundry basket or the laundry hamper. Instead of taking the extra step to throw the socks into the basket, the socks get flung onto the floor, and whenever you see the socks lying there, you are triggered. Okay, so this makes you just furious. This frosts your cookies, whatever metaphor you want to use. You are ticked. They might just be a pair of socks lying innocently on the floor next to the laundry hamper, but for some reason, when you see this, you go nuts. Well, so what can you do? First of all, the very first thing to do is to pay attention. The first step is to just notice and think, oh, I am being triggered right now. Be aware. And one of the things to try and do is to separate yourself from the emotional state, even just long enough to say to yourself, I notice I'm getting really emotional right now. So even that little tiny spark of awareness is going to make a difference. Okay, so the next thing to do after you've noticed that you're getting really emotional is to notice your body. Be in your body. What is happening to it? What is your heart rate doing right now? How is your breathing? What is your stomach doing right now? What are the muscles doing? How tense are they? What's happening there? Sometimes just noticing all of this will break the strength of the emotion because it removes you from it slightly. So just making this mental list of what is going on with you kinesthetically will ease the emotion and lighten it, and sometimes will actually bump you right out of that emotion. So making a physical list, if you're able to, after you practice this once in a while, making a physical list would be even more useful for the next time you encounter this situation, because you might be able to notice trends and patterns that way. So I think the first step is just to actually be self-aware enough to say, wow, I'm getting emotional right now. That's the very first thing. And you might have to do that several times until it becomes second nature and natural. And then you could move to making lists if you're really able to look at yourself and be self-aware in the moment. And that can be challenging. The next step after that is to get curious. So even if you think you know why this sets you off, be curious. Ask yourself, what is it about this situation that makes me crazy? What are my expectations around these socks on the floor? Is it the socks on the floor? Or is it more than that? Is there something behind that? What would happen if I just got curious? And what would come from that? So curiosity is a very, very fine tool and is very useful in this self-examination, self-discovery. So practice being curious. I wonder why. And curious without judging again. It's not bad. It's not good. Just be curious, right? Emotions can be exceedingly strong and can take over your whole entire body. I know I've had times when something has set me off and have found myself in a terribly bad unresourceful mood and wondered sometimes, how the heck did I get here? It was some one little thing that happened and I went crazy. Has this ever happened to you? Have you ever done something or said something that you later regret because emotions were allowed to just take right over? Think of situations in society. In North America, we have road rage, for example, completely triggered emotional response that can end with extremely serious consequences. Imagine what it would be like if the trigger was removed or made inert, right? What would happen if you were able to approach the trigger differently? What if things that just set you off didn't bother you quite as much anymore? Think of how much more in control you might feel if you're able to get to that point. And you know what? It's completely and utterly possible. Once, several years ago, I remember being in the kitchen cleaning up after dinner. And 3 of the other people in my house were sitting in the family room watching TV. And there was a lot to do. The place was a mess, and no one was offering to help. And so the sight of 3 people laughing and obviously enjoying themselves down in the family room while I was being the maid in the kitchen set me off on several levels, actually. The kitchen and the whole house was quite a disaster. I had worked all day and found myself still working. Poor me, it wasn't fair. Woe is me, all of that kind of stuff. Just because I was the wife, woman, mother, didn't mean that I needed to be the only one in the kitchen cleaning up, did it? All this. So all of this was going on in my brain, and I was getting really, really stirred up. I was thoroughly and utterly triggered. I started slamming things around the kitchen to make my point, sighing heavily, snapping at people. I was completely and utterly miserable all by myself and determined to bring everyone else into my unresourceful state of misery. Has anybody else ever been there? I'm just wondering. But I was noticing then. Suddenly I noticed. Suddenly I was able to somehow step back just for a moment and look at my own behavior and think, wow, I'm really being awful right now. I wonder why. So I noticed, and then I got curious. And I thought, Isn't that interesting? I was able to at least step back enough and stop slamming things around to be able to wonder about this. And then I decided to communicate it. So I went to the 3 people in the family room and I asked for their attention for a moment, and the TV got muted. And I kind of said something like this. I said, "So I noticed that I'm being a real cow right about now," which is an expression here in North America that means you're really, really not being nice. And this pretty much got their attention. They're all looking at me like, what is she doing now? And I said, "I think it's because I'm tired and I've worked all day, and I would really, really like to be sitting down there with all of you enjoying the TV show. But instead I'm up here doing the work. And what I would really appreciate would be some help. And I think if everybody took 10 minutes to help me, this would all be done in about a quarter of the time, and then we could all sit down and relax together." So that actually worked. The TV got shut off, and a little sheepishly, they all got up, and in 10 minutes, all the work was done. And I was in a much more resourceful, in control frame of mind, and I ended up enjoying the rest of the evening. And all of that was because I paid attention and noticed my emotional state and got really curious and then said something about it. And please notice that when I did say something, I used my I language. And if you're not entirely sure what I language is, please go back and listen to episode number 23 of Communication Diva. You can get there, I think, by www.communicationdiva.com/23, and you should be able to link directly to that episode. And that's all about using I language. So I didn't say you're all sitting there, because that would put them into a defensive state. I said, "I am tired. I have been working all day. I'm not being very nice. I would really like to be sitting down there with you. I would appreciate if everybody took some time to help me out," etc. So it's using the I language. A lot of the communication is how you phrase it, right? Okay, so we all have emotional triggers, and what we do with them makes the difference to how well we communicate with those around us. So if it's a person that's the trigger, it may be that that person has absolutely no idea the effect they're having on you. In fact, they might not be doing anything. The very sight of them might be the trigger. I used to absolutely groan inside when a particular nurse that I worked with was on shift. I would instantly be in a grumpier mood when I found out that I had to work with this person. And this person had no idea that I reacted this way. I was always very professional and very pleasant to her, but she drove me absolutely nuts. And especially until I started noticing and got curious and sort of wondered what the heck is going on here. I think it wasn't even that it was anything she was doing to me. It was just that in my experience, she appeared to no longer care about her work, to be coasting toward retirement, and was sometimes pretty insensitive to the point of being rude to patients and families. And that was my experience of her. And what drove me nuts was her lack of care in what is supposed to be a very caring profession, right? Nursing, supposed to be very caring. And this person, I was the unit clerk at the desk, and she was the nurse, and people would be coming to me distraught, wanting to know about their relatives, and she would sort of shoo them away and seemed really, really uncaring. Nothing I did was going to change this. But what changed for me was that I started to notice my own behavior and figured out that unless I took the time to sit down with her and find out what was going on for her for real, I could not know that any of what I was actually experiencing was true. So maybe she did still care about her work. Maybe she wasn't coasting to retirement. Maybe she was simply frustrated at the system and the lack of time that she had to do her job in properly, because as some of you know, the increasing demands placed on the role of the nurse are incredible. And so there could have been a number of reasons, so many reasons that were valid, and my made-up story was my own. And because I didn't take the time to sit down with her and say, "Hey, what's going on with you?" I was deciding to figure out for myself how not to get triggered. so that I wouldn't feel that way every time I looked on the roster and saw that I was working with her. I still didn't particularly enjoy working with her any more than I had before, but I had less of a triggered reaction after that and quite a bit more patience. And this isn't to say you have to like everybody, right? There are some people that just drive you crazy, but I was not putting myself into a useful or resourceful state when I did that. And that's the thing. So you're not going to change how anybody else behaves. You can only change your own actions and reactions and habits and patterns. And the great news is that it's entirely possible to do that if you have the desire to, and if you're willing to do a little work. So pay attention to things that trigger an unwanted reaction or state of being within you, even if just for a moment, even if it's just a quick, wow, I'm really emotional right now. And do this again without any judgment about the emotion. It just is. So whatever it is you're feeling, whether you think it's rational or not, just notice it, right? And if you can pull yourself out of the state enough to make notes about it, then do that on paper, in a journal, in your mobile. Just keep track. And the more often you do this, the easier it is to pull yourself out of that state. Be curious about what it is that's behind this intense emotion and how it affects your senses and your physical being. The first step, again, is to notice. And after practicing, you'll be able to pull yourself out of the intensity of the emotion into curiosity, thus breaking the state. So that's emotional triggers, and that's how to recognize them, and that's how to work with them a little bit, and hopefully to lessen the effects of the emotions that come after the trigger has been triggered. I hope you found this episode to be of value, and I really do encourage you to come over to www.communicationdiva.com and say hello. There are links there to Twitter and to Facebook, and there's a comment section. You just click on the word comment that's in brackets, and you can do that either as a guest or through Livefire if you're signed up with that. We are on Stitcher Smart Radio and in iTunes. I would love to have a review in iTunes if you are enjoying Communication Diva. I want to say blessings to all the students and teachers heading back to school this week. May all your communications be good ones. And until next time, this is Jen Swanson. Thank you so much for listening.